hopefully has good audio. Anyone who's seen my live streams know it's becoming a theme. And it's, something that always has to be checked before the beginning of the live stream. But if it does go on, today we'll be reading from a very old book. And, here it is. And we will read in front of our new wood stove. So, without further ado, come on and join me. Come with me to the project. Welcome. And we have a nice new wood stove. Here we go. Set it up. We look and see, where's the chair? Here it is. It goes back. I can get closer to the fire. Well, welcome everyone. For any of you who watch this later. You are quite far away, so if anyone speaks, I just hope the audio is correct. Because a lot of the times it's muffled. We'll just give a moment to see if anyone says if the audio is fine. Can anyone hear me correctly apart from the echo, which can't be helped? That's Baroness. Yes, Papa. Welcome, welcome. Before we begin, let's start the new fire. Well, not new fire, but get a log in there. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this book reading. As I said, you can. Good. You can hear me. That's always good. Audio good? I'm always concerned that there's muffled sound and static noises, so until I know. I do not want to ruin the book reading with that. But let us begin, shall we? We have a chocolate coffee, a good fire, and a good book. What more can we ask for? Today, we have, last time I read, and it's been a while because it's hard to find a moment in here that it isn't being built. But today we have The American by Henry James. This particular book is from 1901, but the story is from 1877. No, 1907, yes, there it is. It's from our great library. So, it's a very wordy book, and it's going to take a lot of concentration to read it. And so I begin. A nice crackling fireplace. The American. tells the story of a man's misadventures in Europe long ago. It's a story, but it's an entertaining one, I feel. Dear American, on a brilliant day in May of the year 1868, a gentle man was reclining at his ease on the great circular divan which at that period occupied the center of the Salon Carré in the Museum of the Louvre. This commodious ottoman has since been removed to the extreme regret of all weak-kneed lovers of the fine arts, but our visitor had taken serene possession of its softest spot, and with his head thrown back and his legs outstretched, was staring at Murillo's beautiful moon-born Madonna in deep enjoyment of his posture. He had removed his hat and flung down beside him a little red guidebook and an opera glass. The day was warm, he was heated with walking, and he repeatedly, with vague wariness, passed his handkerchief over his forehead. And yet he was evidently not a man to whom fatigue was familiar. Long, lean, and muscular, he suggested an intensity of unconscious resistance. His exertion on this particular day, however, had been of an unwonted sort, and he had often performed great physical feats that left him less jaded than his quiet stroll through the Louvre. He had looked out all the pictures to which an asterisk was affixed in those formidable pages of fine prints in his Baedeker. His attention had been strained and his eyes dazzled. He had sat down with an aesthetic headache. He had looked, moreover, not only at all the pictures, but at all the copies that were going forward around them in the hands of those innumerable young women in long aprons on high stools who devote themselves in France to the reproduction of masterpieces. And if truth must be told, he had often admired the copy much more than the original. His physiognomy would have sufficiently indicated that he was a shrewd and capable person, and in truth he had often sat up all night over a bristling bundle of accounts and heard the cock crow without a yawn. But Raphael and Titian and Rubens were a new kind of arithmetic, and they made him, for the first time in his life, wonder at his vagueness. An observer with anything of an eye for local types would have had no difficulty in referring this candid connoisseur to the scene of his origin, and indeed such an observer might have made an ironic point of the almost ideal completeness with which he filled out the mold of race. The gentleman on the divan was a superlative American, to which affirmation of character he was partly helped by the general easy magnificence of his manhood. He appeared to possess that kind of health and strength which was found in perfection are the most impressive, the physical tone which the owner does nothing to keep up. If he was a muscular Christian, it was quite without doctrine. If it was necessary to walk to a remote spot, he walked, but he had never known himself to exercise. He had no theory with regard to cold bathing or the use of Indian clubs. You knew about cold bathing back then? He was neither an oarsman, a rifleman, nor a fencer. He had never had time for these amusements, and he was quite unaware that the saddle is recommended for certain forms of indigestion. He was by inclination a temperate man, but he had supped the night before his visit to the Louvre. At the Café Anglais, someone had told him it was an experience not to be omitted, and he had slept none the less the sleep of the just. His usual attitude and carriage had a liberal looseness, but when under a special inspiration he had straightened himself, he looked a grenadier on parade. He had never tasted tobacco. He had been assured some things are said that cigars are excellent for the health, and he was quite capable of believing it. But he would no more have thought of taking one than of taking a dose of medicine. His complexion was brown, and the arch of his nose bold and well marked. His eye was of clear cold gray, and save for the abundant droop of his moustache, he spoke as to cheek and chin of the joy of the matutinal steel. He had the flat jaw and the firm, dry neck which are frequent in the American type. But the betrayal of native condition is a matter of expression even more than of feature, and it was in this respect that our traveller's countenance was as supremely eloquent. The observer we have been supposing might, however, perfectly have measured its expressiveness and yet have been at loss for names and terms to fit it. It had that paucity of detail which is yet not emptiness, that blankness which is not simplicity, that look of being committed to nothing in particular, of standing in posture, of general hospitality to the chance of life, of being very much at one's own disposal, characteristic of American faces of the clear strain. Who's here? Lawrence of Arabia. Welcome. Yeah. Yes, it is a little bit like The Shining. If you look outside, we have snow as well. Let me plug this in for a moment. There we go. Off we go. It was the eye in this case that chiefly told the story, an eye in which the unacquainted and the expert were singularly blended. It was full of contradictory suggestions, and though it was by no means the glowing orb of a hero romance, you could find in it almost anything you looked for, frigid and yet friendly, frank yet cautious, shrewd yet credulous, positive yet skeptical, confident yet shy, extremely intelligent and extremely good-humored. There was something vaguely defiant in its concession and something profoundly reassuring in its reserve. The wide yet partly folded wings of this gentleman's moustache, with the two premature wrinkles in the cheek above it, and the fashion of his garments, in which an exposed shirt front and a blue satin necktie of too light a shade played perhaps an obtrusive part, completed the element of his identity. We have approached him perhaps at a not especially favorable moment. He is by no means sitting for his portrait, but listless as he lounges there, rather baffled on the aesthetic questioning, guilty of the damning fault, as we have lately discovered it to be, of confounding the aspect of the artist with that of his work. For he admires the squinting Madonna of the young lady with the hair that somehow also advertises art, because he thinks the young lady herself uncommonly taking. He is sufficiently promising acquaintance. Decision, salubrity, jocosity, prosperity seems to hover within his call. He is evidently a man of business, but the term appears to confess, for this particular benefit to undefined and mysterious boundaries which invite the imagination to bestir itself. As the little copyist proceeded with her task, her attention addressed to her admirer from time to time for reciprocity, one of its blankest, though not of its briefest missives. The working out of her scheme appeared to call, in her view, for a great deal of vivid byplay, a great standing off with folded arms and head dropping from side to side, stroking of a dimpled chin with a dimpled hand, sighing and frowning and patting of the foot, fumbling in disordered tresses for wandering hairpins. These motions were accompanied by a far-strained glance, which tripped up occasionally, as it were, on the tall arrest gentleman. At last he rose abruptly, and putting on his hat, as if for emphasis of an austere intention, approached the young lady. He placed himself before her picture and looked at it for a time, during which she pretended to be quite unconscious of his presence, then invoking her intelligence with the single word that constituted the strength of his French vocabulary, and holding up one finger in a manner that appeared to him to illuminate his meaning. "Combien?" he abruptly demanded. The artist stared a moment, gave a small pout, and shrugged her shoulders, but put down her palette and brushed and stood rubbing her hands. "How much?" said our friend in English. "Combien?" "Monsieur wishes to buy it?" she asked in French. "Very pretty, splendid. Combien?" repeated the American. "It pleases monsieur, my little picture. Is a very beautiful subject," said the young lady. "The Madonna, yes. I'm not a real Catholic, but I want to buy it." "Combien?" figured right there. Then he took a pencil from his pocket and showed her the flyleaf of his guidebook. She stood looking at him and scratching her chin with the pencil. "It isn't for sale?" he asked. And as she still stood reflecting, probing him with eyes which, in spite of her desire to treat this avidity of patronage as a very old story, added to her flush of incredulity, he was afraid he had offended her. She was simply trying to look indifferent, wondering how far she might go. I haven't made a mistake. Pas insulter, no?" Her interlocutor continued. "Don't you understand a little English?" The young lady's aptitude for playing a part at short notice was remarkable. She fixed him with all her conscious perceptions and asked him if he spoke no French. Donnez, she said briefly, and took the open guidebook. In the upper corner of the flyleaf she traced a number in a minute, an extremely neat hand, on which she handed back the book and resumed her palette. Our friend read the number. 2,000 francs. He said nothing for a time, but stood looking at the picture while the copyist began actively to dabble with her paint. For a copy, isn't that a good deal?" he inquired at last. "Pas beaucoup?" She raised her eyes from her palette, scanned him from head to foot, and alighted with admirable sagacity upon exactly the right answer. "Yes, it is a good deal. My copy is extremely similar. That's its value. The gentleman in whom we are interested understood no French, but I have said he was intelligent, and here is a good chance to prove it. He apprehended, by a natural instinct, the meaning of the young woman's phrase, and it gratified him to find her so honest. Beauty before talent, rectitude, she combined everything. But you must finish it," he said. "Finish, you know," and he pointed to the unpainted hand of the figure. Oh, it shall be finished in perfection." "In the perfection of perfections," cried Mademoiselle. And to confirm her promise, she deposited a rosy blotch in the middle of the Madonna's cheek, but then the American frowned. Too red," he objected. Her complexion," pointing to the Murillo, "is more delicate." "Delicate? Oh, it shall be delicate, monsieur. Delicate as Chauvray's biscuit. I'm going to tone that down. I promise you it shall have a surface. And where will you allow us to send it to you? Your address?" "My address, oh yes," and the gentleman drew a card from his pocketbook and wrote something on it. Then, hesitating a moment, "If I don't like it, then it is finished, you know. I shall not be obliged to pay for it." Is that you? Is that KP? Hello, KP. The young lady seemed as good a guesser as himself. Reading a book called The American from 1877. The young lady seemed as a good guesser as himself. "Oh, I'm very sure monsieur is not capricious." "Capricious?" And at this monsieur began to laugh. "Oh no, I'm not capricious. I'm very faithful. I'm very constant. Comprenez? Monsieur's constant. I understand perfectly. It's not the case of all the world. To recompense you, you shall have your picture on the first possible day. Next week, as soon as it's dry, I'll take the card of monsieur." And she took it and read his name. "Christopher Newman?" Then she tried to repeat it aloud and laughed at her bad accent. "Your English names are not commodious to say." "Well, mine's partly celebrated," said Mr. Newman, laughing. "Did you ever hear of Christopher Columbus?" "Bon, sir. He first showed the Americans the way to Europe. A very great man. And is he your patron?" "My patron? Your patron saint, such as we all have." Oh, exactly. My parents named me after him." "Monsieur's American then too?" "Doesn't it stick right out?" Monsieur inquired. "And you mean to carry my dear little picture away over there?" She explained her phrase with a gesture. "Oh, I mean to buy a great many pictures. Beaucoup, said Christopher Newman. The honour is not less for me, the young lady answered, for I'm sure monsieur has a great deal of taste. But you must give me your card, Newman went on. Your card, you know? The young lady looked severe an instant. My father will wait on you. But this time Mr. Newman's power of divination were at fault. Your card, your address, he simply repeated. My address? Said Mademoiselle. Then with a little shrug, happily for you, you're a stranger of distinction. Que savoir, it's the first time I've ever given my card to a gentleman. And taking from her pocket well-worn flat little wallet, she extracted from it a small glazed visiting card and presented the letter to her client. It was neatly inscribed in pencil with a great many flourishes. Millie Naomi Nioche. But Mr. Newman, unlike his companion, read the name with perfect gravity. All French names to him were equally incommode, and precisely how it happens, here's my father. He was come to escort me home, said Mademoiselle Naomi. He speaks English beautifully, he'll arrange with you. And she turned to welcome a little old gentleman who came shuffling up and peering over his glasses at Newman. Nioche wore a glossy wig of an unnatural colour which overhung his little meek white vacant face, leaving it hardly more expressive than the unfeatured block upon which these articles are displayed in the barber's windows. He was an exquisite image of shabby gentility. His scant, ill-made coat desperately brushed, his darned gloves, his highly polished boots, his rusty, shapely hat, told the story of a person who had had losses, and who clung to the spirit of nice habits, even though the letter had been hopelessly effaced. Among other things, M. Nioche had lost courage. Adversity had not only deprived him of means, it had deprived him of confidence, so frightened him that he was going through his remnant of life on tiptoe, lest he should wake up afresh to hostile fates. If this strange gentleman should be saying anything improper to his daughter M. Nioche would entreat him huskily, as a particular favour, to forbear, but he would admit at the same time that he was very presumptuous to ask for particular favours. Monsieur has bought my picture, said Mademoiselle Naomi. When it's finished, you'll carry it to him in a cab. Hello, everyone. Hello. Reading a book. In a cab, cried M. Nioche, and he stared in a bewilderment way, as if he had seen the sun rising at midnight. Are you the young lady's father? Said Newman. I think she said you speak English. Speak English? Yes. The old man slowly rubbed his hands. I'll bring it in a cab. Say something then, cried his daughter. Thank you a little, not too much. A little, my daughter, a little, he murmured in distress. How much? 2,000, said Mademoiselle. Don't make a fuss or he'll take back his word. 2,000, gasped the old man, and he began to fumble for his snuff-box. He looked at Newman from head to foot. He looked at his daughter and then at the picture. Take care you don't, spoil it, he cried almost sublimely. We must go home, said Mademoiselle Naomi. This is a good day's work. Take care how you carry it, and she began to put up her utensils. How can I thank you? Asked M. Nioche. My English is far from sufficing. I wish I spoke French half so well, said Newman good-naturedly. Your daughter, too, you see, makes herself understood. Oh, sir. And M. Nioche looked over his spectacles with tearful eyes, nodding of his depths of sadness. She has had an education, très supérieur. Nothing was spared. Lessons in pastel at 10 francs, the lessons in oil at 12 francs. I didn't look at the francs then. She's a serious worker. Do I understand to say that you've had bad time? Asked Newman. Bad time? Oh, sir, misfortunes, terrible. Unsuccessful in business? Very unsuccessful. Oh, never fear, you'll get on your legs again, said Newman cheerfully. The old man cast his head to one side. He wore an expression of pain as if this were an unfeeling jest, whereupon, what is it he says? Mademoiselle Naomi demanded. Amniach took a pinch of his snuff. He says, I shall make my fortune again. Perhaps he'll help you, and what else? He says, thou hast a great deal of head. It's very possible you believe it yourself, my father. Believe it, my daughter, with this evidence. And an old man turned afresh and staring wondering homage to the audacious daub on the easel. Ask him then if he'd not like to learn French. To learn French? To take lessons? To take lessons, my daughter, from thee? From thee? From me, my child. How should I give lessons? Pas de raison. Ask him immediately, said Mademoiselle Naomi with soft shortness. Amniach stood aghast, but under his daughter's eyes he collected his wits and, doing his best to assume an agreeable smile, executed her command. Would it please you to receive instructions in our beautiful language? He brought out with an appealing quaver. To study French. Newman was rather struck. Amniach pressed his fingertips together and slowly raised his shoulder. A little practice in conversation? Practicing conversation, that's it, murmured Mademoiselle Naomi, who had caught the words. The conversation of the best society. Our French conversation is rather famous, you know, Amniach ventured to continue. It's the genius of our nation. But except for your nation, isn't it almost impossible? Asked Newman very simply. Not to a man of esprit, like monsieur, an admirer of the beauty in every form. And Amniach cast a significant glance at his daughter's Madonna. I can't fancy myself reeling off fluent French, Newman protested. And yet I suppose the more things, the more names of things a man knows, the better he can get around. Monsieur expresses that very happily. The better he can get around. Allez, oui! I suppose it would help me a great deal, knocking about Paris, to be able to try at least to talk. Oh, there are so many things, monsieur, they must want to say. Remarkable things, and proportionately difficult. Everything I want to say is proportionately difficult, but you're in the habit of giving lessons? Poor Amniach was embarrassed. He smiled more appealingly. I am not a regular professor, he admitted. I can't pourtant tell him I've a diploma, he said to his daughter. Tell him it's a very exception of chance, answered Mademoiselle. Un homme de monde, one perfect gentleman conversing with another. Remember what you are, remember what you have been. A teacher of languages in neither case. Much more dans le temps and much less to say. And if he asks the price of the lessons, he won't ask it, said the girl. What he pleases, I may say. Never. That's bad style, but if he wants to know. Mademoiselle Naomi had put on her bonnet and was tying the ribbon. She smoothed them out, her shell-like little chin thrust forward. 10 francs, she said quickly. Oh, my daughter, I shall never dare. Don't tell then. He won't ask to the end of the lesson, and you'll let me make out the bill. Amniach turned to the confiding foreigner again and stood rubbing his hands with air of standing convicted of almost any counsel of despair. It occurred to Newman to plead for a guarantee of his skill in imparting instructions. He supposed, of course, Amniach knew the language he so beautifully pronounced, and his brokenness of spring was quite the perfection of what the American, for vague reasons, had always associated with all elderly foreigners of the lesson-giving class. Newman had never reflected upon philological process, his chief impression with regard to any mastery of those mysterious correlatives of this familiar English vocabulary, which was current in this extraordinary city of Paris, was that it would be simply a matter of calling sharply into play latent but dormant muscles and sinews. How did you learn so much English? He asked of the old man. Oh, I could do things when I was young, before my miseries. I was wide awake then. My father was a great Commerçant. He placed me for a year in a counting house in England. Some of it stuck to me, but much I've forgotten. How much French can I learn in about a month? What does he say? Asked Mademoiselle, and then her father had explained. He'll speak like an angel. But the native integrity which had been vainly exerted to secure M. Neot's commercial prosperity flickered up again. No, monsieur, he answered. All I can teach you. And then recovering himself at a sign from his daughter, I'll wait upon you at your hotel. Oh yes, I should like to converse with elegance, Newman went on, giving his friend the benefit of any vagueness. Hang me if I shouldn't ever have thought of it. I seemed to feel it too far off, but you've brought it quite near. And if you can catch on at all to our... reading the wrong voice. Hang me if I should ever have thought of it. I seem to... No, wait. Oh, yes, but you've brought it quite near. And if you could catch on at all to our grand language, that of Shakespeare and Milton and Holy Writ, why shouldn't I catch on to yours? His frank, friendly laugh drew the sting from the jest. Only if we're going to converse, you know, you must think of something cheerful to converse about. You're very good, sir. I'm overcome. And M. Neos threw up his hands. But you've cheerfulness and happiness for two. Oh no, said Newman more seriously. You must be bright and lively, that's part of the bargain. M. Neos bowed with his hand on his heart. Very well, sir. You struck up a tune I could almost dance to. Come and bring me my picture then. I'll pay you for it and we'll talk about that. That will be a cheerful subject. Mademoiselle Naomi had collected her accessories and she gave the precious Madonna in charge to her father, who retreated backwards out of sight, holding it at the arm's length and reiterating his obstinance. The young lady gathered her mantle about her like a perfect Parisian, and it was with the au revoir, monsieur, of a perfect Parisian that she took leave of her patron. That is the end of the first chapter. You know, it is a great piece of literature. Many contemporary authors can't write like that. Let me try something. I'm going to sit on subscribers only mode. Let's see what this does. Just going back to normal. I mean, it is subscribers only mode before, but yeah. It's just very interesting. I shall read my other book again next time I read. But it is difficult to understand how these things work. Of course, I am only reading these books to help me continue to read these nice classics and share them with all of you as well. First time I read the book, it was it had so many people watching. It was odd. Perhaps it was because it was the first time. But we shall see. Shall we continue reading? Perhaps we shall. How long has it been? Only 33 minutes? We can go on to the next chapter. Cheers, this is staying cold, I mean warm. So, Chapter 2, The American. This personage wandered back to the divan and seated himself on the other side in view of the great canvas on which Paul Veronese has spread to swarm and glow. Glow there forever, the marriage feast of Cana of Galilee. Weary as he was, his spirit... Weary as he was, his spirit went out to the picture. It had an illusion for him. It satisfied his conception, which was strenuous, of what a splendid banquet should be. Come here. You don't know that you can come over here to this warmer area. There you are. left-hand corner is a young woman with yellow tresses confined in a golden headdress. She bends forward and listens with the smile of a charming person at a dinner party to her fistal neighbor. Newman detected her in the crowd, admired her, and perceived that she too had her votive copyist, a young man whose genius, like that of Samson, might have been in his bristling hair. Suddenly he was aware of the prime throb of the mania of the collector. He had taken the first step. Why should he not go on? It was only 20 minutes before that he had bought the first picture of his life, and now he was already thinking of art patronage as a pursuit that might float even so heavy a weight as himself. His reflections quickened his good humor, and he was on the point of approaching the young man with another combien. 2 or 3 facts in this relation are noticeable, although the logical chain that connects them may seem imperfect. He knew Mademoiselle Nioche had asked too much. He bore her no grudge for doing so, and he was determined to pay the young man exactly the proper sum. At this moment, however, his attention was attracted by a gentleman who had come from another part of the room and whose manner was that of a stranger to the gallery. Though he was equipped neither with guidebook nor with opera glass, he carried a white sun umbrella lined with blue silk, and he strolled in front of the great picture, vaguely looking at it, but much too near to see anything but the grain of the canvas. Opposite Christopher Newman, he paused and turned, and then our friend, who had been observing him, had a chance to verify a suspicion roused by an imperfect view of his face. The result of the larger scrutiny was that he presently sprang to his feet, strode across the room, and with an outstretched hand arrested this blank spectator. The gaping gentleman gaped afresh, but put out his hand at a venture. He was large, smooth, and pink, with the air of a successfully potted plant, and though his countenance, ornamented with a beautiful flaxen beard, carefully divided in the middle and brushed outwards at the sides, was not remarkable for intensity of expression, it was exclusive only in the degree of the open door of a hotel. It would have been closed to the undesirable. It was for Newman, in fact, as if it at first he had been but invited to register. "Oh, come," he said, laughing. "Don't say now you don't know me. If I've not got a white parasol." His tone penetrated the other's face, expanded to its fullest capacity, and then broke into gladness. "Why, Christopher Newman, I'll be blowed. Where in the world, who would have thought you carried out such an extensive alteration?" "Well, I guess you've not," said Newman. "Oh, no, I hold together very much as I was. But when did you get here?" 3 days ago." "Then why didn't you let me know?" "How was I to be aware?" "Why, I've been located here quite a while." "Yes, it's quite a while since we last met." "Well, it feels long, since the war." "It was in St. Louis at the outbreak. You were going for a soldier," Newman said. "Oh, no, not I. It was you. Have you forgotten?" "You bring it unpleasantly back." "Then you did take your turn." "Oh, yes, I took my turn, but that was nothing. I seem to feel to this turn." "How long have you been in Europe?" "Just 17 days. First time you've been?" "Yes, quite immensely the first." Newman's friend had been looking him all over. "Made your everlasting fortune?" Our gentleman was silent a little, and then with a tranquil smile, "Well, I've grubbed," he answered, "and come to buy Paris up. Paris is for sale, you know." "Well, I shall see what I can do about it. So they carry these parasols here, the menfolk?" "Oh, of course they do. They're great things, these parasols. They understand detail out here. Detail." "Where do you buy them?" "Anywhere, everywhere." "Well, Tristram, I'm glad to get a hold of you. I guess you can tell me a good deal. I suppose you know Paris pretty correctly?" Newman pursued. Mr. Tristram's face took a rosy light. "Well, I guess there are not many men that can show me much. I'll take care of you." "It's a pity you were not here a few minutes ago. I've just bought a picture. You might have put the thing through for me." "Bought a picture?" said Mr. Tristram, looking vaguely around the walls. "Why, do they sell them?" "I mean a copy." "Oh, I see these." Mr. Tristram nodded up at the Titans and the Van Dykes. These, I suppose, are originals. I hope so. I don't want a copy of a copy. Ah, his friend sagaciously returned. You can never tell. They imitate, so deucedly well. It's like the jewelers with their false stones going to the Palais Royal there. You see imitations on half the windows. The law obliges them to stick it on, but you can't tell the things apart. To tell the truth, Mr. Tristram continued, and his grimace seemed to turn the screw of discrimination. I don't do so very much in pictures. They're one of the things I leave to my wife. Ah, you've acquired a wife? Didn't I mention it? She's a very smart woman. You must come right round. She's up there in the Avenue de Lena. So you're regularly fixed, house and children and all? Oh yes, a tip-top house and a couple of charming cubs. Well, sighed Christopher Newman, stretching his arms a little, you've affected me with a queer feeling that I suppose to be envy. Oh no, I don't, answered Mr. Tristram, giving him a little poke with his parasol. I beg your pardon, you do? Well, I shan't then. When, you don't certainly mean when I've seen your pleasant home. When you've made yours, my boy. When you've seen Paris. You want to be in light marching order here. Oh, I've skipped about in my shirt all my life, and I've had all about enough of it. Well, try it on the basis of Paris. That makes a new thing of it. How old may you be? 42.5, I guess. C'est le bel age, as they say here. Newman reflected. Does that mean the age of the belly? It means that a man shouldn't send away his plate till he has eaten his full. It comes to the same thing. I've just made arrangements anyhow to take lessons in the language. Oh, you don't want any lessons. You'll pick it up. You'll pick it right up. I've never required nor received any instructions. You speak it then as easily as English. Easier, said Mr. Tristram roundly. It's a splendid language. You can say all sorts of gay things in it. But I suppose, said Christopher Newman with an earnest desire for information, that you must be pretty gay to begin with. Yeah, they certainly spoke differently back then, and the ways they speak can just become a joke now, almost. Not a bit. That's just the beauty of it. The two friends, as they exchanged these remarks, which dropped from them without a pause, had remained standing where they met and leaning against the rail which protected the pictures. Mr. Tristram at last declared that he was overcome with lassitude and should be happy to sit down. Newman recommended in the highest terms the great divan on which he had been lounging, and they prepared to seat themselves. This is a great place, isn't it? He broke out with enthusiasm. Great place, finest thing in the world. And then suddenly Mr. Tristram hesitated and looked about. Now, I suppose they don't let you smoke. Newman stared. Smoke? I'm sure I don't know. You know the regulations better than I. I never was here before. Never? All your 6 years? I believe my wife dragged me here once when we first came to Paris, but I never found my way back. But you say you know Paris so well. I don't call this Paris, cried Mr. Tristram with an assurance. Come, let's go over to the Palais Royal and have a smoke. I don't smoke, said Newman. What's that for? Mr. Tristram growled as he led his companion away. They passed through the glorious halls of the Louvre, down the staircase, along the cool, dim galleries of sculpture, and out into the enormous court. Newman looked about him as he went, but made no comments. And it was only when they at last emerged in the open air that he said to his friend, It seems to me that in your place I'd have come here once a week. Oh, no, you wouldn't, said Mr. Tristram. You'd think so, but you wouldn't. You wouldn't have had time. You'd always mean to go, but you never would go. There's better fun than that here in Paris. Italy is the place to see pictures. Wait till you get there. There you have to go. You can't do anything else. It's an awful country. You can't get a decent cigar. I don't know why I went into that place today. I was strolling along, rather hard up for amusement. I sort of took in the Louvre as I passed, and I thought I might go up and see what was going on. But if I hadn't have found you there, I should have felt rather sold. Hang it, I don't care for inanimate canvas or for cold marbly beauty. I prefer the real thing. And Mr. Tristram tossed off his happy formula with an assurance which the numerous class of persons suffering from an overdose of prescribed taste might have envied him. The two gentlemen proceeded along the Rue de Rivoli and into the Palais Royal, where they seated themselves at one of the little tables stationed at the door of the cafe which projects or then projected into the great open quadrangle. The place was filled with people, the fountains were spouting, a band was playing, a cluster of chairs were gathered beneath all the lime trees, and buxom white-capped nurses seated along the benches were offering to their infants charges the amplest facilities for nutrition. There was an easy, homely gaiety in the whole scene, and Christopher Newman felt it to be characteristically richly Parisian. And now, began Mr. Tristram, when they had tasted the decoction he had caused you to be served to them. Now just give an account of yourself. What are your ideas? What are your plans? Where have you come from? And where are you going? In the first place, where are you hanging out? Yes, Mr. Tristram asks this of all the chat watching. And now, began Mr. Tristram, when they had tasted the decoction he had caused them to serve about, at the Grand Hotel, he put out all his lights. That won't do, you must change. Change? Demanded Newman. Why, it's the finest hotel I ever was in. You don't want a fine hotel. You want something small and quiet and superior where your bell's answered and your personality recognized. They keep running to see if I rung before I touch the bell, said Newman. And as for my personality, they're always bowing and scraping to it. And I suppose you're always tipping them. That's a very bad style. Always. By no means. A man brought me something yesterday and then stood loafing about in a beggarly manner. I offered him a chair and asked him if he'd sit down. Was that bad style? Nah, I'll tell my wife, Tristram simply answered. Tell the police if you like. He bolted right away at any rate. The place quite fascinated me. Hang your superior if it bores me. I sat in the court of the Grand Hotel last night until 2 o'clock in the morning, watching the coming and going and the people knocking about. You're easily pleased. But you can do as you choose. A man in your shoes, you've made a pile of money, eh? I've made about enough. Happy the man who can say that, but enough for what? Enough to let up a while, to forget the whole question, to look about me, to see the world, to have a good time, to improve my mind, and if my hour strikes, to marry a wife. Newman spoke slowly with a quaint effect of dry detachment and with frequent pauses. This was his habitual mode of utterance, but it was especially marked in the words just recorded. Jupiter, there's an order, cried Mr. Tristram. Certainly all that takes money, especially the wife. Unless, indeed, she gives it, as mine did. And what's the story? How have you done it? Newman had pushed his hat back from his forehead, folded his arms, and stretched his legs. He listened to the music, he looked about him at the bustling crowd and the plashing fountains and the nurses and the babies. Well, I haven't done it by sitting round this way. Tristram considered him again, allowing a finer curiosity to measure his generous longitude and retrace the blurred lines of his resting face. What have you been in? Oh, and more things than I care to remember. Oh, I suppose you're a real live man, eh? Newman continued to look at the nurses and babies. They imparted the scene a kind of primordial pastoral simplicity. Yes, he had said at last, I guess I am. And then, in answer to his companion's inquiry, he briefly exposed his record since their last meeting. It was with intensity a tale of Western world, and it showed in that bright alien air very much a fine, desiccated, articulated specimen, bleached, monstrous, probably unique, show in the height light of museums of natural history. It dealt with elements, incidents, and enterprises which it will be needless to introduce to the reader in detail. The deeps and the shallows, the ebbs and the flows of great financial tides. Newman had come out of the war with a brevet of brigadier generals, an honor which in this case, without invidious comparisons, had lighted upon the shoulders amply competent to carry it. But though he had proved he could handle his men, and still more the enemy with effect, when need was, he heartily disliked the business. His 4 years in the army had left him with a bitter sense of the waste of precious things, life and time and money and ingenuity and opportunity, and he had addressed himself to the pursuit of peace and passionate zest and energy. His interest, already matured, had meanwhile, however, waited for him, so that the capital at his disposal had ceased to be solely his whetted knife-edged resolution and his lively perception of ends and means. Yet these were his real arms and exertions as natural to him as respiration. A more completely healthy mortal had never trod the elastic soil of great states of his option. His experience, moreover, had been as wide as his capacity. Necessity had, in his 14th year, taken him by his slim young shoulders and pushed him into the street to earn that night's supper. He had not earned it, but he had earned the next night's, and afterwards, whenever he had none, it was because he had gone without to use the money for something else, a keener pleasure or a finer profit. He had turned his hand with his brain in it to many things. He had defied example and precedent and probability, and had adventures almost to madness, and escaped almost by miracles, drinking alike of the flat water when not the rank poison of failure, and of the strong wine of success. A born experimentalist, he had always found something to enjoy in the direct pressure of fate, even when it was irritating as the haircloth shirt of the medieval monk. At one time, defeat had seemed inexorably his portion. Ill luck had become his selfish bedfellow, and whatever he touched had turned to ashes out of which no gleaming particle could be raked. His most vivid conception of a supernatural element in the world affairs had come to him once when he felt his head all too bullyingly pummeled. There seemed to him something stronger in life than his personal, intimate will, but the mysterious something could only be a demon as personal as himself, and he accordingly found himself in fine working opposition to this rival concern. He had known that it was to have utterly exhausted his credits, to be unable to raise $1, and to find himself at nightfall in a strange city without a penny to mitigate its strangeness. It was under these circumstances that he had made his entrance into San Francisco, the scene subsequently of his most victorious engagement. If he did not, like Dr. Franklin in Philadelphia, march along the street, munching a penny loaf, it was only because he had not the penny loaf necessary to the performance. In his darkest day, he had but one simple practical impulse, the desire, as he would have phrased it, to conclude the affair. He had ended by concluding many, had at last buffeted his way into smooth waters, and began and continued to add dollars to dollars. It must be rather nakedly owned that Newman's only proposal had been to effect that addition. What he had been placed in the world for was, to his own conception, simply to gouge a fortune, the bigger the better, out of its hard material. This idea completely filled his horizon and contented his imagination upon the uses of money, upon what one might do with his life, into which one had succeeded in injecting the golden stream he had up to the eve of his 40th year very scantily reflected. Life had been for him an open game, and he had played for high stakes. He had finally won, and had carried off his winnings, and now what was he to do with them? He was a man to whom sooner or later the question was sure to present itself, and the answer to it belongs to our story. A vague sense that more answers were possible than his philosophy had hitherto dreamt of had already taken possession of him, and it seemed softly and agreeable to deepen as he lounged in this rich corner of Paris with his friend. And he thought of all that, and then he said, "I must confess," he presently went on, "that I don't here at all feel my value. My remarkable talent seems of no use. It's as if I were as simple as a little child, and as if a little child might take me by the hand and lead me about." There's a sliver. "Oh, I'll be your little child," said Tristram jovially. "I'll take you by the hand. Trust yourself to me." "I'm a grand good worker," Newman continued, "but I've come abroad to amuse myself, though I doubt if I very well know how." "Oh, that's easily learned." "Well, I may perhaps learn it, but I'm afraid I shall never do it by rote. I have the best will in the world about it, but my genius doesn't lie in that direction. Besides," Newman pursued, "I don't want to work at pleasure any more than ever I played at work. I want to let everything go. I feel coarse and loose, and I should like to spend 6 months as I am now, sitting under a tree and listening to a band. There's only one thing. I want to hear some first-class music. First-class music and first-class pictures. Lord, what a refined taste. You've what my wife calls a rare mind. I haven't a bit." but we can find something better for you to do than to sit under a tree. To begin with, you must come to the club. What club? The Occidental. You'll see all the Americans there, all the best of them at least. Of course, you play poker? Oh, I say, cried Newman with energy, you're not going to lock me up in a club and stick me down at a card table. I haven't come all this way for that. What the deuce then have you come for? You were glad enough to play poker in St. Louis, I recollect, when you cleaned me out. I've come to see Europe to get the best out of it I can. I want to see all the great things and do what the best people do. The best people? Much obliged, you set me down then as one of the worst. Newman was sitting sideways in his chair, his elbow out on the back and his head leaning on his hand. Without moving, he played a while at his companion, his dry, guarded, half inscrutable and yet altogether good-natured smile. Introduce me to your wife. Tristan bounced about on his seat. Upon my word, I'll do nothing of the sort. She doesn't want any help to turn up her nose at me, nor do you either. I don't turn up my nose at you, my dear fellow, nor at anyone, nor anything. I'm not proud. I assure you I'm not proud. That's why I'm willing to take example by the best. Well, if I'm not the rose, as they say here, I've lived near it. I can show you some rare minds too. Do you know General Packard? Do you know C.P. Hatch? Do you know Miss Kitty Upjohn? I shall be happy to make their acquaintance. I want to cultivate society. Tristram seemed restless and suspicious. He eyed his friend askance and then, what are you up to anyway? He demanded. Are you going to write a heavy book? Christopher Newman twisted one end of his moustache in silence, and finally made answer. One day, a couple of months ago, something very curious happened to me. I had come on to New York on some important business. It's too long and too low a story to tell you now. A question of getting in ahead of another party on a big transaction and on information that was all my own. This other party had once played off on me one of the clever meanness, the feeling of which works in a man like strong poison. I owed him a good one, the best one he was ever to have, got in his life, and as his chance here, for he was after it, but on the wrong tip, would have been a remarkably sweet thing. A matter of $500,000, I saw my way to show him the weight of my hand. The good it was going to do me, you see, to feel it come down on him. I jumped into a hack and went about my business, and it was in this hack, this immortal historical hack, that the curious thing I speak of occurred. It was a hack like any other, only a trifle dirtier, with a greasy line along the top of the drab cushions, as if it had been used for a great many Irish funerals. It's possible I took a nap. I had been traveling all night, and though I was excited with my errand, I felt the want for sleep. At all events, I woke up suddenly from a sleep or from kind of reverie with the most extraordinary change of heart, a mortal disgust for the whole proposition. It came upon me like that, and he snapped his fingers, as abruptly as an old wound that begins to ache. I couldn't tell the meaning of it. I only realized I had turned against myself worse than against the man I want to smash. The idea of not coming by that $500,000 in that particular way, of letting it utterly slide and scuttle and never hearing of it again, became the only thing to save my life from a sudden danger. And all this took place quite independently of my will. And I sat watching it as if it were a play at the theater. I could feel it going on inside me. You may depend upon it that there are things going on inside us that we understand mightily little about. Jupiter, you make my flesh creep, cried Tristram. And while you sat in your hack watching the play, as you call it, the other man looked in and collared your $500,000? I haven't the least idea. I hope so, poor brute. But I never found out. We pulled up in front of the places I was going to in Wall Street, but I sat still in the carriage, and at last the driver scrambled down off his seat to see whether his hack hadn't turned into a hearse. I couldn't have got out any more than if I had been a corpse. What was the matter with me? Momentary brain collapse, you'll say. What I wanted to get out of was Wall Street. I told the man to drive to the Brooklyn Ferry and cross over. When we were over, I told him to drive me out of the country, as I had told him originally to drive for dear life downtown. I suppose he thought I had lost my wits. On the way, perhaps I had, but in that case, my sacrifice of them has become, in another way, my biggest stroke of business. I spent the morning looking at that first green leaves on Long Island. I had been so hot that it seemed as if I should never be cool enough again. As for the damned old money, I have enough already not to miss it. You see how that spoils my beauty. I seemed to feel a new man under my old skin. At all events, I had longed for a new world. When you want a thing so very badly, you probably had better have it and see. The word is better have it and be, or and see, or something. The word's gone. I didn't understand my case in the least, but gave the poor beast the bridle and let him find his way. As soon as I could get out of harness, I sailed for Europe, and that's how I came to be sitting here. You ought to have brought up that hack, said Tristram. It isn't a safe vehicle to have about, and you've really wound up and sold out then. You've formally retired from the business? Well, I'm not at present transacting on any terms. There'll be plenty to be done again if I don't hold out, but I shall hold out as long as possible. I dare say, however, that a 12-month hence the uncanny operation will be repeated in the opposite sense and the pendulum swing back again. I shall be sitting in a gondola or on a dromedary or on a cushion at the feet of beauty, and all of a sudden I shall want to clear out. But for the present, I'm perfectly free. I even arranged that I'm to receive no business letters. Oh, it's real caprice de prince, said Tristram. I back out? I back out? A poor devil like me can't help you to spend such very magnificent leisure at that. You should get introduced to the crowned heads. Newman considered a moment, and then with all his candor, how does one do it? He asked. Come, I like that, tried Tristram. It shows you're in earnest. Of course I'm in earnest. Didn't I say I wanted the best? I know the best can't be had for mere money, but I'm willing to take a good deal of trouble. You're not too shrinking, eh? I haven't the least idea. I must see. I want the biggest kind of entertainment a man can get. People, places, art, nature, everything. I want to see the tallest mountain and the bluest lake, and the finest pictures and the handsomest churches and the most celebrated men and the most elegant women. Settle down in Paris, then. There are no mountains that I know of higher than Montmartre, and the only lake in the Bois de Boulogne, and not particularly blue, but there's everything else. Plenty of pictures and churches, no end of celebrated men and several elegant women. But I can't settle down in Paris at this season, just as summer's coming on. Oh, for the summer, go right up to Trouville. And what might Trouville be? Well, a sort of French Newport, as near as they can come. All the Americans go. Is it anywhere near the Alps? About as near as Newport to the Rocky Mountains. It's not that far from the Rocky Mountains, so it's probably talking about a different Newport. Oh, I want to see Mont Blanc, said Newman. And Amsterdam, and the Rhine, and a lot of places. Venice in particular. I've grand ideas for Venice. Ah, said Mr. Tristram, rising. I see I shall have to introduce you to my wife. She'll have grand ideas for you. End of chapter. We shall end there. Yes, it is a lovely stove. Hello, Signa. Good to see you here. Very nice that you have joined us, and yes. That was a good story, and as we can see, the fire is just about out. So we're good to put in it, but I think we'll end there. It was a good story, and I think I shall read more of it. Come next time. I may start to do these in the early morning when it stops being so freezing around here. But, yes. Thank you for joining me on this cool story evening, morning, afternoon. whatever the case may be, across all 25 time zones. This has been Henry James, the American, 8 from 1877, up to chapter 2. And next, we shall be reading more of The Rough Riders by Teddy Roosevelt. Oh, it's 2 a.m. there. Well, it was a good bedtime story then. I'm glad I could have read to you. So, thank you for sticking around. I see you've stuck around the longest. So thank you to Nayland, Signa, KP, Lawrence of Arabia, good name. It's been fun. Bye-bye and see you next time. What would he say? What would Mr. Rogers say? Such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up, ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy new day. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling. The feeling you know that I'll be back when the day is new, and I'll have more ideas for you. And we'll have things you'll want to talk about. I will too. You can make each day such a special day. You know how? By just your being you. There's only one person in the whole world like you, and that's you yourself. Thanks for joining, everyone. Bye-bye.